Have you ever heard the phrase, put on your thinking cap? A cap is a type of hat, and to put on your thinking cap means to use your head and start thinking. We use the language of clothing all the time to talk about many different things. Have you ever heard someone talk about walking a mile in someone's shoes, or putting yourself in someone else's shoes? It means not to judge anyone until you understand where they're coming from and what they're going through. Or what about he'd give you the shirt off his back? It means that person would give you anything he has, even the shirt he's wearing. People have been using expressions about clothing for a long time. So long that in some cases they've outlasted the fashions that inspired them. That's where fashion historians like me can help. My name is Kimberly Chrisman-Campbell. Studying the history of fashion is my job. Together, we're going to explore the fashion history behind some common phrases you might have heard before. This is the history of talking about fashion.
Hi, young historians. Welcome to another episode of Anytime Now. I'm Brooke, the co-founder of Honest History, and today's episode is about one of my favorite topics. We have a lot of funny phrases in the English language, and today we are going to talk about why we use some of them and the history behind them. As with all cultures, aspects of our daily lives often become little sayings that we use frequently. Some of these phrases stick around in our vocabulary for a long time, until some people don't even know where the saying came from originally. As you listen to this episode, make a few mental notes of some of the funny phrases you've heard or used before. Maybe next time someone you know uses the phrase, you can politely give them a mini history lesson and show off your talents as a young historian. But that's enough from me. Let's dive in.
Fashion is something we wear, but it's also something we talk about all the time, often without even knowing it. Has anyone ever encouraged you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps? Today, it means to help yourself by hard work. But if you know your fashion history, you'll realize that's not really what it meant at all originally. Back in the early 19th century, when men wore tight, knee-high leather boots as fashionable footwear, bootstraps were the leather loops at the tops of the boots. They used them to pull their boots up over their calves. But you couldn't actually pull yourself up with them. It would be like lifting yourself over a fence by pulling up on your socks. In fact, at that time, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps was slang for trying to do the impossible, and usually looking very silly in the process. Remember that next time someone tells you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Here's a better way to encourage someone to work hard using the language of fashion. Tell them to roll up their sleeves. If you're wearing long sleeves and you need to do a dirty job with your hands, it makes sense to roll up your sleeves to keep them clean and out of the way. But it's also a way of saying get to work, no matter what you're wearing. Have you ever tried to do something off the cuff? It means to act or speak spontaneously. That is, without planning in advance. But what does that have to do with a cuff, the part of your shirt sleeves that goes around your wrist? Once again, we have to go back to the 19th century, when men wore shirts with detachable collars and cuffs. Buying clothes and doing laundry was a lot more expensive back then, because there weren't as many machines to help with the sewing and washing. To save money, men could buy collars, cuffs, and shirt fronts made of paper. They looked like clean starched fabric, and when they got dirty, they could be thrown away and replaced easily and cheaply. Sure, the rest of your shirt might need washing and ironing, but it was hidden by your jacket, so the collar and cuffs got dirty first, and that's what people saw most. In 1872 alone, Americans went through 150 million disposable shirt collars and cuffs. But there was another advantage to wearing paper cuffs. You could write on them. If you needed to remember something, you could read it off the cuff rather than reading from a piece of paper, and no one would know you hadn't memorized it. Some historians think this practice originated with actors trying to remember their lines on stage. Others believe it was how waiters remembered the daily specials in restaurants. And plenty of kids have gotten in trouble for cheating on tests at school because they wrote the answers on their sleeves or hands. In fact, we sometimes say that people who are trying to cheat us or trick us have something up their sleeve. That's because a player who was trying to cheat in a card game might hide an extra card up his sleeve where no one would see it until he needed it to win the game, usually a valuable card like an ace. Another variation of this expression is saying you have an ace up your sleeve, which means you have a secret advantage or plan, though not necessarily a dishonest one. Has anyone ever told you you're mad as a hatter? The Mad Hatter is a character in Lewis Carroll's book Alice in Wonderland, published in 1865. But the phrase mad as a hatter is even older than that. In this case, mad doesn't mean angry, but crazy, because hatters really did go crazy from the chemicals they used to make hats. In order to turn the fur of animals like rabbits and beavers into felt for hats, hat makers used a chemical called mercury nitrate, not realizing that it was really dangerous if you touched it, ate it, or heated it and inhaled the fumes. Mercury poisoning could cause shaking hands, slurred speech, skin rashes, hallucinations, memory loss, and brain damage, giving hatters a reputation for odd behavior. There was even a name for this condition, Mad Hatter disease. So everyone knew that making hats was dangerous, even in Lewis Carroll's time. But mercury nitrate continued to be used in hat making until it was banned in 1941. Today, hardly anyone wears hats every day. But it wasn't so long ago that both men and women wore them all the time, even indoors. For much of history, people with different jobs and ranks wore different hats. So everyone could tell what you did for a living by the kind of hat you wore. Cowboys wore cowboy hats. Sailors wore sailor hats. Bishops wore pointed hats called mitres. Professors and their students wore mortarboards, the flat hats that you now see only at graduation ceremonies. Policemen, firemen, and nurses wore their own special hats. That's why when someone does many jobs or fills many different roles, we say that they wear many hats. It's also why your teacher might tell you to put on your thinking cap when you need to solve a problem or come up with an idea. Hats didn't just keep your head warm and dry. They were useful for all kinds of things. If I told you to be ready to go somewhere or do something at the drop of a hat, I'd mean immediately, without delay. Back when men wore hats every day, dropping a hat or waving a hat in a downward motion was a common signal to start a race, just like you'd shoot a starting gun or wave a checkered flag today. The competitors would be all ready to go, but they could only start when they saw that hat drop. Similarly, to take off your hat or tip your hat to someone means to show them respect, even if you're not wearing a hat. Because back in the days when people did wear hats, it was considered good manners to tip them or remove them around someone important or powerful, as a sign of respect. Have you ever been told to handle something with kid gloves? It means to be very careful. I'm sure you know what gloves are, but you probably don't wear them every day, except maybe in winter if you live somewhere really cold. For many centuries, gloves, just like hats, were part of everyday dress all year round. Kid gloves were gloves made of kid skin, leather from the skin of a young goat or kid. Kid skin was very thin and very soft, which meant it was great for making gloves because you could cut it and sew it as easily as regular fabric, and it would fit you really well like a glove should. That's also where we get the expression fits like a glove, meaning that something is a perfect fit, almost like a second skin. Kid skin really was a second skin, but it was also very fragile. If you were handling something with kid gloves, you'd have to be very careful not to tear them. But at the same time, your gloves would feel pretty soft and supple against whatever they were touching. So, to handle something with kid gloves means to be very gentle, like you would with something fragile or expensive. Have you ever heard it said that someone wears the pants in a family or a situation? Today, both men and women wear pants. But it was only 100 years ago that it was really unusual for a woman to wear pants. She might wear them for certain sports or at the beach, but never in public life. So wearing the pants meant to be in charge, usually a woman being in charge, because until the early 20th century, it was only men who wore pants, and they were in charge of most things. Today, nobody minds if a woman wears pants or is in charge, but that expression is still used to mean that someone holds a position of power. Here's one everybody knows. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat, and called it macaroni. That might sound really silly to you, but it makes perfect sense to a fashion historian. The song Yankee Doodle was written in the 1760s during the French and Indian War by a British soldier. He was making fun of soldiers from New England, Britain's American colonies. The British called them Yankees and considered them to be country bumpkins. Over the years, people added their own made-up verses to the song until it got really long. But the one verse that everyone remembers today describes Yankee Doodle's fashion sense. Around the time the song was first written in the 18th century, a group of young Englishmen who had traveled to Italy and considered themselves very sophisticated and stylish formed a club in London. They called it the Macaroni Club, after the Italian pasta, which was a new and exotic dish in England at the time. Macaroni became slang for anything elegant and unusual, and young men who dressed in flamboyant Italian fashions like elaborate wigs, colorful striped stockings, and yes, feathered hats were called macaronis. So when Yankee Doodle stuck a feather in his hat, he was trying to look like those cool kids in London, even though he was a country bumpkin from New England. There are so many expressions about clothing. Without even knowing it, people talk about fashion all the time. Can you think of any other ways we talk about fashion in everyday conversation? I bet you can if you put on your thinking cap.
Hi, it's Brooke again. I love how the saying, off the cuff, comes from the use of paper cuffs. Fashion history is so fascinating, and it makes me wonder what historians in 200 years will be saying about the clothes we wear today and how our clothes will influence phrases in the future. I also wonder if our great-grandchildren will be saying things like, put on your thinking cap. Anyways, I hope you loved this episode as much as I did. We are busy working on more exciting stories from history, but If you can't wait until the next episode, then check out Honest History's books and magazine. From secret spy missions to the rediscovery of the Maya pyramids, we have something for everybody. See you next time. This episode was hosted by Kimberly Chrisman-Campbell and written by Heidi Coburn. Production was led by Randall Lawrence. To learn more about this episode, including more about the host, visit us at honesthistorymag.com and follow along for updates on social media at Honest History.